Hi, my name's Colin Jarvis and I'm the Vice President of Stealth Belt Inc. I've had my ileostomy since 2014, and during that time I've led an extremely active lifestyle. But in order to be able to do that, I had to make sure that I rebuilt my core strength to reduce the chances of developing a peristomal hernia. Today, I'm going to be walking through some of the exercises that I did during that time to make sure that I was strong enough to do the activities that I wanted to do. When you're first getting started with rebuilding your core strength after having surgery, the best thing to do is to spend a few weeks while the incisions close up, just walking as much as you can. That's normally what doctors recommend to do right after surgery, and you've probably heard it already, but I just want to make sure that anybody who's watching this, if you're trying to rebuild that core strength, that the number one thing you do is be patient and take it slow. It's not a race. You want to just make sure that you've done everything properly, because once you get past the point where you're strong enough, things become a lot easier. So just keep that in mind as you go through all of this process. I'm going to be demonstrating 10 different exercises today. The first 4 exercises are the ones that you should focus on first. Exercise number 1 is called a posterior pelvic tilt. For the posterior pelvic tilt, you're going to want to get into a laying down position, like so, with your knees at about a 45-degree angle. From this position, you're going to engage your transverse abdominis muscles, which wrap around the entirety of your midsection, in order to tilt your pelvis towards the back. So it looks something like this. It's a subtle movement, but what I'm doing is I'm pressing in using my core, kind of imagining pushing my belly button in towards the ground. And when you're laying here, you may find that from the neutral position that you have some space in between your low back where there's a little bit of an arch. And what you're doing when you tighten down this muscle is you're actually pushing the core into the ground and activating this whole system right through here to close that gap underneath your back. This subtle movement where you're engaging the core in your transverse abdominis muscles is critical to helping to prevent a hernia, because when you've gotten an incision through that portion of your abdomen, it can actually cause a lot of issues in terms of your stability. And this transverse abdominis muscle is largely responsible for keeping your pelvis and your thoracic spine in alignment and using it the way that it's meant to be used. When you're performing the anterior pelvic tilts from this position, you want to make sure that as you push down into the ground and you're activating those core muscles, the lower core muscles to do that, that you hold for about 3 to 5 seconds. And to start, it's probably best to start with about 5 to 10 repetitions where you're holding for 5 seconds at that flexed point and rotating back and forth. So hold for 5 and release, hold for 5 and release. And that's just training these muscles to start firing again properly. Over time, as you get more comfortable with the pelvic tilt, you'll be able to hold it for 5 seconds and do more like 30 repetitions. And in the first few weeks, as you start adding these exercises into your daily routine, you'll find that that activation is kind of the foundational movement for all of the other exercises that I'll be going over today. The next exercise is just the next step in the variation of the anterior pelvic tilt that we did in the first one. So you're going to get into the same position, so laying flat with your legs at about that 45-degree angle. And from this point, making sure that you're breathing regularly. You don't want to hold your breath, but make sure that your core is engaged, so you're pushing and you've reduced that space in between your back. You shouldn't be able to fit a hand there while you're engaging this core. And what we're going to do is just some marches, and that will look something like this. So you'll bring the knee up to about a 90-degree angle and then back down, and you can alternate legs like so. And so you'll want to do about 5 to 10 of these on each leg to start, And like the pelvic tilts, you will eventually build up to the point where you're doing 20 to 30 on each leg. And what you want to focus on when you're doing this particular exercise is making sure that you're not using your hip flexors to pull your leg up. So you don't want this muscle to be driving the leg. You want that to come from the core. So you're thinking about pushing that belly button in towards the ground and really using the lower abdominal muscles to pull that leg up and keep it really engaged. So it'll feel a little strange, but once you kind of get the hang of keeping that muscular system engaged, this will make a lot more sense, and over time it'll just become more and more natural. So now for exercise number 3. Again, this is still coming from that first one where you're focusing on using your lower core to engage that pelvic tilt. And you're going to be starting from the same position, but this time you're going to need something like a rolled up sweater. I like to use a rolled up blanket. As long as it's about this size, it will fit comfortably between your knees, and you'll get into that same position. And you'll take your rolled up blanket or towel and put it between your knees like so. And this time, as you work on your pelvic tilt, it's the same movement. You're going to be squeezing your knees together at the same time as doing a Kegel exercise. Most of the women who are watching this will probably be more familiar with what a Kegel is for women's health and just the recovery from a lot of postnatal exercises. But actually, when you've got the same types of surgeries that we have, especially if you still have a portion of your rectum still left in place, it's important that you still work on those muscles that are responsible for activating in your lower core, so down below the pelvis. So what that looks like is you'll be in that position, and then again you'll use the core to press down, and at the same time you'll be squeezing in. And then in order to do the Kegel, the best thing what I like to think about it as is kind of like you're holding in a fart. And we don't fart anymore, obviously, because we have ostomies, but the act of like kind of holding it in while you're bringing the knees together and engaging the core, it kind of gets all of those things firing at once. And that whole chain of system is going to be really critical for making sure that your core regains the strength it needs to help prevent a peristomal hernia from forming. So with these, you'll want to squeeze together, do your Kegel, and hold the pressing down of the abdominal muscles here for about 5 seconds, and then release, and then squeeze, push in, make sure you're not holding your breath, release, and you'll do that about 10 times each day. And just remember to continue to build on that over the course of the first few weeks, starting slow and progressing up to more like 20 or 30 5-second holds as a part of your daily core strengthening routine. And now the fourth exercise that I recommend as a good starting place, and what I did when I was early on, is a modified side plank. So this is the first step to getting to a full side plank, but in those early days right now, you'll want to modify it, and I'll show you how that looks. So you'll want to get over onto your side with your elbow just below your shoulder. So when you're up, you want there to be a straight line all the way down. And you're going to have your bottom leg bent with your knee on the ground, pushing your hips forward, remembering that pelvic tilt. You're going to engage that lower abdominal muscles and the pelvic floor to keep that rotated pelvis. And you can extend the top leg out like this, and you're just going to do about a 30-second hold right here to start. Once you're comfortable with that, you can add in little dips and do that for the 30 seconds, and of course you'll want to switch to the other side. But what's really important to remember when you're doing this, again, is making sure that your elbow's directly beneath your shoulder and you've got a straight line all the way down here, that your core is engaged, that you're pushing forward. And while you're doing this, the bonus is you're going to feel the glute medius and glute max, both of those muscles that are out here on the side and the actual butt itself. Those should be firing in conjunction with the core because it's all a related system. So when you're in that position, make sure pelvis is forward, glutes firing, straight line, and you should feel an engagement in your obliques here along the side of the core. So now you've seen the first 4 exercises that are most recommended for immediately after surgery when you're still really weak and you need to just have that really safe buildup. Make sure to stay there and master those moves as much as possible for the first few weeks. And once you're really confident, you can move on to these next 6. So the 5th exercise that I'm going to show you guys today is actually just a glute bridge. When you're doing a glute bridge, you're probably familiar with what this is, but you really want to focus in, again, on that pelvic tilt, which is why it's so important to do the groundwork exercises first for a while and make sure you have a really good understanding and engagement with those muscles. So I'll show you what I mean. So you're going to be, again, in that same starting position where your legs are at about a 45-degree angle, laying flat, and then now you're going to engage the core so that this lower abdominal muscle is pressing down and eliminating the space between your low back and the ground. And from here, you're going to tilt the pelvis, and then once the pelvis is as tilted as you can possibly get it, I'm almost getting my butt off the ground just using my core. Now I'm going to go to the glutes, squeeze together, keeping in mind, kind of remembering that towel squeeze that we did earlier, using all those same muscles. But from here, I'm going to drive my weight down through the heels, so your toes might even lift off the ground a little bit, driving the weight through the heels, activating the glutes, and pressing up. And so from this position, you really want to make sure that your core is nice and engaged all the way through and that you've got a straight line. Now that's really important because you don't want this arching of the back to happen when you're pushing up and to let this core disengage. Because we want the glute muscles and the core muscles to be firing together. So you'll start from this position, you'll do your pelvic tilt, push into the heels, and go up. So it's a nice straight line, and you're nice and engaged all the way through. And the best way to do this would be, again, just start off with rounds of 10. So 10 by 3 to 5 second holds. So you'll go up, hold for 3 to 5 seconds, go back down. Go up, 3 to 5 seconds, and back down. And eventually, you will be able to add those up and start doing more like 20 to 30 5-second holds with your glute bridges, and put all 10 of these exercises together so that you've got a full workout routine for your core, and doing that maybe 3 to 5 times a week would be ideal once you've built up over the first few weeks. So now we're on to the 6th exercise of the core re-strengthening series, and that one is called the dead bug. So let me demonstrate what that looks like. So again, like all of these exercises so far, you'll start in that laying down position, but this time you're going to extend your legs straight out like this, and you'll see that when you bring your legs straight out, the natural inclination is for your back to kind of arch upwards and start to give you that like hyperlordotic shape. You want to use the core to rotate that pelvis and push the belly button in towards the spine and reduce that space that's back there. So once you're laying in that position, what you'll do is you will put your arms straight up like this, bring your knees up into 2 90-degree angles, like so, and then using opposite leg and opposite arm, outreach one at the same time. So left leg, right arm, and I'm gonna lift this leg just off the ground and the hand just off the ground behind me, and you'll have it about 2 or 3 inches off the ground. You'll hold for 1 to 3 seconds, bring it back up, and right when you meet that point, you'll alternate to use the other ones. So a little hold, and then back up. Little hold, and then back up. And now this exercise is a little bit more complicated, and you should feel a lot more engagement throughout the entirety of your core. Even just sitting in this position, I'm feeling my core firing. So if you're sitting here doing this exercise and you're not feeling it in your core and you're feeling it in your hip flexors instead, then you're gonna want to go back and start working on your pelvic tilts again so that that muscle system is firing properly. So for the dead bugs, like all the other exercises, you'll start with about 10 5-second holds and progress upwards from there, probably to 20 or 30 per leg as part of the total exercise. But again, I'm gonna keep driving this home, take it slow. All right, now we've done the dead bugs and we're on to exercise number 7, which is going to be a modified tabletop, and then I'll show you what the full tabletop is for when you're ready to progress beyond it. So the modified tabletop will look like this. You'll have your arms directly out in front of you, and you want your wrists to be right below your shoulders, and you want to use your body to make it as straight as possible with your knees on the ground and using your core to keep your body as straight as possible. And you're just gonna hold there for about 30 seconds. If you're feeling really confident with this, you can also start to add in some modified push-ups where your knees are holding your weight. So it's like this, and you should feel all of those same muscles, even your glutes and your core firing in order to do this properly. Now, the next step to the tabletop is the same idea. You want your wrists stacked directly beneath your elbows, directly beneath your shoulders, and then out behind you, you'll extend both of your legs into this full tabletop position. And when you're in this position, you want to make sure that your shoulder blades are rolled down and backwards, that your core is really strong and engaged, and your glute muscles are firing too. So you don't want anything like that where your back is arched and you've got some weird shapes. You want everything to be straight and engaged, and you're just gonna hold that for as long as you can. And to make this even more difficult, what you can do is alternate tapping your shoulders like so, and you can just do that for 30 seconds at a time. This movement, especially when you get to the full tabletop, is a little bit more advanced. So make sure that you start with the modified tabletop where you're on your knees, and again, just keep in mind that lower abdominal core muscle engagement is absolutely critical. And for our next exercise, this is actually going to be performed from a sitting position. So you're going to want a stool or a chair, or if you have it available to you, a yoga ball is actually the best option because the yoga ball is less stable and it helps you engage those core muscles. But when you're getting started, it may be better to start with something a little bit more stable. I've got a stool right here, so I'm going to demonstrate the sitting yoga ball or seated knee raise exercise. So from this sitting position, you're going to want to make sure that your core is really engaged and that this whole area is firing. You're pushing the belly button in. So if you're looking at it from a side profile, your body should be perfectly in alignment. It should be straight up and down and nice open expansive posture. And from this position, what you're going to do is use your core, not your hip flexors, your core to lift the knee up as much as possible and hold for a couple seconds and then alternate. So this is also very similar to many of the other exercises that we've done. Very similar to the dead bug. You'll feel it really engaging and specifically in this area. And this is a good one to get started with as well. And so for these, you'll want to do probably around 10 on each leg to get started, much like the others, and then build up as it feels comfortable. The next exercise that I would recommend as a part of this early phase for rebuilding the core strength is a standing or sitting activated reach. And so what that looks like is simply just make sure that your transverse abdominis muscles are fully engaged. So you're imagining your rib cage being pulled up away from your hips. What I like to do is think about taking as deep a breath as I can. And then when I release the air, I keep the rib cage up where it was at the top of my breath. And so I'm using my core to keep my chest where it was at the maximum point of my deep breath. And so now that I've found this position, I'm going to put one hand at the hip, and then the opposite hand is going to reach up and then slightly back, like that. And so you'll feel this in a number of places. One, you should feel a stretch a little bit along this side, but if you're doing it properly, you need to be activating these muscles on the side here so that it's not collapsing. You want to stretch this side, but keep this one expanded. So one mistake that people often make with this is they're trying to reach as far as possible, and I'll show you the difference. So it'll look like this, and then they'll want to reach and they'll let their body kind of collapse like that, and they'll feel more of a stretch here, so they're thinking, oh, that must be working better. But that's actually missing the point of the exercise. You want to make sure that, again, deep breath, you're up there, and this space between your lower rib cage and your hip, you want to keep that as expanded as possible. And then when you reach up and over there, you'll feel your back engage, and this part of your obliques will begin to stretch a little bit, but really keep the rib cage and the hip separated like that, and then go up and back slightly. So I'll give you a side profile of that as well. From this position, it may be easier to stand if your hips aren't flexible enough to sit upright. You can do this standing as well, but you want that back nice and flat. I'm using my core to make that happen, and then one arm on the side, up, and then back slightly. So it's a little bit off to the side. You'll want to do about 5 to 10 on each side. Take your time, move slowly through that movement, and really pay attention to what muscles are firing and which ones are stretching, and breathe into it. You want to make sure you're breathing throughout all of these exercises. And finally, the last exercise of this first series is going to be the Supermans. And that one actually can be a little tricky for people who've got an ostomy because Supermans involve laying flat on the ground. So I'm going to show you two variations. Personally, I use the hybrid style stealth belt, which has some neoprene across the face, and it's enough of a cushion where I feel fine as long as the bag's empty, laying flat. And the Superman is going to look just like this from the ground. So you'll lay flat, and what you want to think about while you're doing this is, again, that same muscular system that we've been using this whole video is going to be engaged. Your glutes are engaged so that your pelvis is pushing into the ground, and using that power in this center part of your body, you're going to engage the middle back here, not the low back, the middle back here, and then push into the ground here, and you'll go like that. You can either have your arms behind you like that, or if you want a little bit more challenge, you can have it out in front like that. I'll do it back here, for example, and you'll do about 1 to 3 second holds at the top. So 1, 2, 3, and then back down. 1, 2, 3. And it's best to start not lifting your legs up when you do that. That's a different exercise. You want to actually think about pushing your whole legs into the ground. So I'm actively using my glutes and my core to push my pelvis down, push my feet down into the ground, and then using my mid back to lift up. And you'll do 10 to 20 of those 1 to 3 second holds. And now I'll show you the standing variation of that exercise as well. Okay, so this is the standing variation of the Supermans. I highly recommend doing it on the ground if you can, and I understand if that's a little tough with an ostomy, but this can be a first step, and eventually you may feel a little bit more comfortable with doing it on your stomach, because you'll find that when you start to activate the right things, like if your stoma is up higher than like where your pelvic floor is, most of the weight actually goes into the pelvic floor, and the ostomy is not going to have as much direct pressure. But again, move at your own pace, and here we are with the standing variation of the Supermans. So what you're going to want to do is stand right up against the wall and face it so that your toes are basically touching the wall in front of you, and from that position you're going to have your arms up like this in kind of that like 90-degree scarecrow position, and using your
your core muscles, tilt your pelvis forward. So tilting forward like that, really engaging that pelvic thrust. Glutes are squeezed nice and tight throughout the whole thing. And then from the wall, use that as a guide to move backwards like so. And when you do that movement where you're moving backwards, again, make sure that your bend is not coming from the low back. So what we don't want to see is that, right? So if you see that, I've got this like really hyper lordotic shape to the spine. No, I want the core to keep that engaged so that this lower portion of your back stays nice and braced and that the bend comes from this middle section. So you should really feel these muscles in your middle back engaging so that when you're doing that, it looks more like this rather than that. All right, so same idea, about 10 of those 1 to 3 second holds to start and then progress on from that point. So those are the first 10 core exercises that I did when I was rebuilding my core strength immediately after having surgery. Again, I would recommend really focusing in on getting those first 4 down. They're kind of the fundamental elements that you need to build off of. Start off slow, work on those first 4, master them, and then when you're ready, move on to doing all 10 exercises at one time and do that 3 to 5 times a week. And if you are consistent with it, and consistency is one of the most important things here, if you are consistent with doing that, you should be able to work on it for a couple of months and you'll see really big improvements, not just in your strength, but also in your posture. So I made another video that talks more in depth about the benefits of posture and then some other tips on how to help prevent a hernia. So if you want to check those out, I'll put those links in the description and I'll try and put a little pop-up here at the end of the video. But thank you so much and stay tuned for some more tips and tricks for how to live a better life with an ostomy. All right,